I guess first, if you could just kind of start from the beginning. How did you get involved? I don't know if it was something where you were already involved with nursing and then got into the military, or did they both come at the same time? Can you just start and give me some context on how old you were, what time it was, in your life, and how this all came to be that you got into the Army Nurse Corps?
Okay, I was 23, and at a phase in my life where all my friends were getting married, and I wasn't. And a friend of mine told me about somebody else we had gone to nursing school with who joined an Air Force unit at Scott Air Force Base, which is about 30 miles from where I live. Long and the short of it, I joined this associate unit and went to officer basic in the Air Force, and then to flight nurse school, came home and flew for off and on for about a year on the C-9s, which were a new plane for aeromedical evacuation. And of course I saw they were largely Vietnam casualties coming home. And I think the war came home to me in a way that it hadn't before. Not that I didn't know about it, but I was young and energetic and immortal, and so I did an inter-service transfer from the Air Force Nurse Corps to the Army Nurse Corps on the contingency that I could go to Vietnam. And of course, I didn't have any trouble guaranteeing that for me. They'd sign me up right away. Went to officer basic in the Army at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, and from there went to Vietnam. I spent the first 6 months in Chu Lai, which was in what they call I Corps, pretty far north in South Vietnam. And then in October of '71, Typhoon Hester came along and literally blew our hospital away. And so we were there for a couple of weeks without running water, without electricity, until such time as they figured out where to send us. I went to Da Nang, to the 95th Evacuation Hospital, and spent the rest of my tour there.
And about what year was it?
Oh, that was, let's see, I joined the Air Force in November of '69, and then I ended up in Vietnam in spring of '71.
Okay. Obviously, many the Army personnel and such were drafted over there, but it sounds like this was something you chose to do. Is that fair to say? Or?
I did. And not every nurse in Vietnam, not every Army nurse in Vietnam volunteered to go to Vietnam. For example, a lot of people had joined the Army Student Nurse Program, and there was no guarantee of where you would go. Typically, they would spend 6 months to a year stateside and then go to Vietnam. Obviously, in Tet of '68, a lot of nurses who maybe had 6 months of clinical experience after graduating were immediately shipped to Vietnam. So not everybody there was a volunteer.
And you said, I guess it sounds like you kind of, when you saw the casualties, maybe that was kind of a calling that you wanted to help. Can you kind of go into a little more detail and describe how you're feeling then?
Yeah, as I said, the war came home to me. I saw real people who had been wounded, some of them horribly, some of them not so bad. If they were wounded a third time, even if it was a minor wound, they got to come home. And I don't know, I think I was at a stage in life where I was looking to do something exciting. I'm a product I'm a baby boomer. My dad and all of his contingency, all my uncles and were in World War II and came out. They were not career people, but I guess I had that sensation of if there's something that should be done, I should be a part of that.
And so, in going there, when you were traveling over there from the U.S. to Vietnam, and what were your feelings? Obviously, as you know, it's a war. You may not come back. You knew you were going to be around a lot of terrible things. So, I mean, what were you thinking and feeling at that time?
Frankly, I wasn't afraid. I think I was excited to see exactly what I had ahead of me. I was just excited and with some anticipation of what the experience was going to be like. I had, by that time, 2 or 3 years of critical care nursing experience, so I had a lot of confidence in my clinical skills, and I was looking forward to applying them in an area where they were certainly needed.
So fear never really crossed your mind?
No, and it should have. One time we used to go on what they called MedCaps, Medical Civilian Action Programs, one of the places we would go to was a leper colony. One of our doctors had some training in plastic surgery, and we would go to the leper colony. I didn't bring any surgical skills with me, but I would go along because the kids were so cute. And the Hollis Caffey, he would do blepharoplasties because lepers, they lose the fat pad around their eyes, and they end up going blind because of blinking their eyes. They scratch their scratch the eyeball and eventually lose their eyesight. So I was with one of the other doctors, and we were out just kind of wandering around, admiring the foliage. And when we were found by a senior NCO who was just white with fear, because we didn't have enough sense to be afraid. We were out looking at the flowers. So no, I should have been a lot more afraid than I was.
When you first got on the ground, I mean, what was that like? Culture shock, or can you describe that?
Yeah, I knew it was serious business when we got on a bus. We came into Long Bin. I think that was Tan Son Nhut Air Force Base, if I'm not mistaken. We landed in Long Bin because that's where the replacement center was, and we'd get our assignments from there. I knew it was serious when they had wire, like cage wire, on the windows of the bus, so nobody would lob a hand grenade in at us. That's when I think it hit me that this is, we're not in Disneyland. Not that I expected Disneyland, but this is some serious business.
And can you kind of, describe when you first got there? I guess you got to your first post, your first hospital. I mean, that kind of process of getting settled in, and that's something that I haven't experienced, and I think a lot of people wonder, it seemed maybe overwhelming. So can you describe that time?
I remember the heat. My God, the heat in Vietnam and the humidity was, who could be there and not remember that? I was met by the chief nurse, Colonel Maxine Douglas, and rather matter-of-factly given my assignment. She was a wonderful, wonderful woman, wonderful person. She gave each of us a police whistle to blow in case anybody bothered us, which I didn't anticipate, and it didn't happen to me. I was given my assignment, and I was to be. I worked for the first 6 weeks or so, 6 to 8 weeks in the intensive care unit, and Mickey Wassel and I shared half of a hooch, and you just move in. The Army's pretty mission-oriented. They don't spend a lot of time coddling people or inquiring about your feelings. They're pretty bottom line. Wonderful people. I met an awful lot of wonderful people on active duty, but it's about getting the job done.
What kind of parts of your life, family, relationships, did you have to leave behind or interrupt in order to do this? My mother and dad were worried. They didn't want me to go. They didn't actively oppose it. I have a sister and 2 brothers. We stayed in touch. I can't honestly say it was that disruptive. It was something I wanted to do. Maybe that's the variable there. And what did you know before going over there as far as the conflict about the country? Was it a lot? Was it just something you'd see and hear on the news or in the newspaper? Can you kind of tell me about that? Well,
I obviously saw a lot on the news, on the television, as did so many people. You would see people, see the casualties occurring as the film was rolling. I think coming in the generation after World War II, I certainly had seen my share of John Wayne movies and the television. I remember Combat and Gallant Men were on like when I was maybe an adolescent. And I just bought lock, stock, and barrel into the notion that if there's any threat to this country, and the thinking then was this domino theory, that communism was going to spread all over the world if we didn't stop it in Southeast Asia. I guess I just wanted to do my part. Not that I single-handedly was going to stop the spread of communism, but it was a rather unexamined reaction to what I perceived to be a call to the nation, again, World War II, Korea, to step up to the plate. I didn't have any really strong political opinions one way or the other, but a luxury I had, though, is I knew in going to Vietnam as a nurse, I wouldn't be put in a position of having to kill somebody. I would only be in a helping role.
I know in talking to Bernadette a few weeks ago, she had talked about how, at the time there were some feminist protesters, and she would say to them, well, if you want to join the, or if you want to be treated equally, join the Army, because she was treated equally, she felt. I mean, did you get that kind of sense, or was there anyone saying, well, you're a woman, how can you, did you ever get that kind of feeling, how can you go over to this war zone, like, women shouldn't be over there? I mean, did you ever get that kind of sense from people around that time, or?
No. No, frankly, I didn't. But being a nurse, I mean, that's kind of self-explanatory, and the majority of nurses back then were women. We still are. The majority of nurses are still women. No, frankly, I didn't. But I grew up in a pretty egalitarian family, and all of my roots are Irish. Irish women tend to be kind of stand up for themselves. No, I didn't feel it was any kind of a feminist issue. It wasn't for me anyway.
Okay. So when you first got there, you mentioned, if you can refresh my memory, where were you in the country again?
I went to the 91st Evacuation Hospital in Chulai, and that was just a little south of Da Nang.
So daily life, can you kind of describe those first few months, just, generally, what was daily life like?
We worked 12-hour shifts, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. or 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. Obviously, the day your routine would depend on what shift you were working. Just get up of a day, say by 6 o'clock, go to the mess hall. We used what they called MPCs, military pay certificates, I guess, because we weren't supposed to use American currency because of the black market. Breakfast was 25 cents. Eat breakfast. I was really impressed by the Army's food. They always had plenty to eat. And then go on to your, in my case, intensive care, and then the casualty triage area where I later moved. Get report from the off-going nurses and corpsmen and pick up where they left off. It was horribly hot, and it wasn't fancy, but it was much more alike civilian nursing than maybe people would expect. The routine was pretty much the same. And then we would go to lunch when we could. We had, at least in the ICU, we had, it was referred to as DD time. DD Mao means get out of here in Vietnamese. I'm sure my pronunciation could use some improvement. But Colonel Douglas knew that we arranged our own DD time, so if things were slow, people would take a couple hours, maybe go back, take a nap, come back. There wasn't a whole lot to do. There weren't a whole lot of places to go. And then at the end of the shift, sometimes you just hang around because there really wasn't anywhere to go, anything to do. The mama-sans did our laundry. I think that was $2 a month, as I recall. And then you would spend time negotiating for what would be the next, how you could improve your housing. I showed you a picture of I turned in a picture of the first place where I lived. It was a hooch on a cliff overlooking the South China Sea. And then I ratcheted up a little bit when one of the nurses was going home. Her parents had sent her an air conditioner, and you would basically buy the person's room. Like, she had a little refrigerator, she had an air conditioner, and I think I paid her like $75 or something for basically buying the contents of her room. So I moved up in the world, if you will. And life was just kind of coming and going. As I say, there wasn't a whole lot to do. We would have movies sometimes in the evening over in the officers' club. Occasionally there'd be an entertainer, no fancy names. And volleyball, that was a big, because we could string the net between one building and the other. And that's pretty much it.
What was life like in the actual intensive care? I mean, can you give me a sense of that? You mentioned it was hot. I mean, the smells, the sights, the sounds. I mean, for someone who hasn't been there, can you kind of describe that for me?
I remember the first night. I must have started on nights. I remember the first night when I went into the Quonset hut. Our intensive care unit was one big open bay Quonset hut, and then there was a connection with another big open bay Quonset hut that was a recovery room. When I went in there were two little Vietnamese kids with their heads all wrapped up, and next to them was a GI who was badly wounded. turns out that these two little kids had set the explosive that injured this GI. So it's kind of a little bit of a reality shock. You know, and you have to examine your own ethics. Am I comfortable giving the quality of care that I would give to an American, to quote the enemy? You do some serious thinking about where are your values. Occasionally, we had air conditioning in the when we had power, we had air conditioning in the intensive care Quonset hut. And that helped keep people's fevers down. One thing I remember very clearly was a young pilot. His name was Lance Workman, first lieutenant, had stepped out of his helicopter and stepped on a landmine. I think the reason I remember him so vividly is his mother was a nurse, and she made it all the way to Chulai without a passport, just explaining to people, my son's been wounded, I have to get there. And she stayed for maybe a week or so with Colonel Douglas and then went home. This young fellow was from Chattanooga, Tennessee, and I think he died on July 17th, if I'm not mistaken. And I was with him when he died. It was in the middle of the night. In fact, Monica Lawler was her maiden name. She was with me at the time. She worked in ICU too. I remember him very vividly. And again, I think probably because it was such an unusual event for a parent to show up. It was serious business, obviously. And if we had an extra pair of hands, and things were maybe, we had caught up with our work in the ICU, go next door over to the recovery area. And that was sobering, because many times I would be the first person that some young kid would wake up and talk to after he'd lost a leg, maybe both legs, when it was kind of tentative when he was going into surgery. Would they be able to save the leg or wouldn't they? And that's, I like to think that the advice I gave people, those young guys, and the talking discussions I had with them, sometimes just one way, or just a one-way conversation, registered with them. Because it was the first message that they got after they'd lost a limb, for example, and about how the need to go on, and you'll be going home. And, you know, the worst part, hopefully, is in back of you. And I didn't sugarcoat anything, because I hadn't lost a limb. But to try to give them some perspective, that must have, I can't imagine being a scared 18, 19-year-old kid halfway around the world, no doubt having been drafted, to wake up in a damp, humid Quonset hut and find out you were missing a leg. There's no family there, no loved ones. I mean, we had a lot of responsibilities other than just the physical care of patients.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of that is you're not, you know, you're acting as a kind of a psychiatrist or psychologist, possibly. I mean. Yeah,
you're their mom, their sister. Frankly, though, I'm amazed how tough those guys were. You know, I didn't see. I'm sure they had to have been scared. They had to have been depressed. But those young grunts, they were some really stand-up guys. I mean, they whatever came their way, they seemed to, at least at that stage, to have faced it and integrated it. And I don't know what happened to many of them after they came home. But basically, you're just another human being there in the same set of circumstances, trying to be of some support, however hollow that might be, given that kind of an experience.
Well, you mentioned they were tough. I'd imagine the nurses, though, would also have to be tough mentally, emotionally. I mean, can you kind of, did it ever take a toll on you mentally, emotionally? I would imagine many people would, to see all these wounded soldiers coming in and out every day. Can you describe that?
It was sad. I can't say it was depressing. It was sad to see all these young, otherwise healthy guys. And as I've gotten older, I guess with the perspective of being a mother and being many, many years older now, I look at toddlers, like my little grandson. And I think these guys, okay, they were brave, they were stand-up people, they were also little kids at one point. And it's kind of, when I roll that back and think of them as little 18-month-old kids bopping around, it really adds a dimension of sadness to it. And the nurses were, I think our humor is probably what saved us, and not dark humor. There was nothing funny about Vietnam. But way down in our roots, people had great senses of humor, great senses of humor. Some of the funniest experiences I have had in life, I had over there. And one of the other things that I think I've learned, one of the things that came home to me, an insight, I guess, when I was there is I thought this would be such a wonderful setting, if you will, for a social psychologist to see how people interact in what I called a completely classless society. When the water went off, it went off for everybody. It didn't matter what neighborhood you'd grown up in, what your father had done, how much money you had in the bank. After about 3 days, everybody starts to smell pretty much alike. When any of the resources are gone, it levels everybody. And you see how basically how much people are alike. And it doesn't matter about your race or your religion or your gender. If you're a nice person, you're just a nice person. I saw some kids, the young guys over there who hadn't finished high school. And there were some quality people. And that was, I don't think we could ever socially engineer, because it would be a product of engineering, the classless society that I saw in Vietnam. It's something that has really stuck with me.
Now, how did your attitude of the, North Vietnamese, the enemy, figure into that? You mentioned before about looking at your ethics, examining that. Do I treat the enemy? I mean, did they, we've heard some people say, even though I know they were people, I still didn't like them because of what I've seen them capable of doing. I mean, how did you feel about them?
I remember I took care of, this was in the ICU, an NVA, North Vietnamese Army Irregular, as they were called. They were not Viet Cong, they were North Vietnamese. He was an officer. And I took care of him in the ICU. I can honestly say I gave him what the law refers to as standard of care treatment, because I remember at the time I had some communication with a nun that I'd had in high school, and writing to her about that I thought the preparation that I'd gotten in school gave me some fortitude to draw on. And I remember he just hollered and screamed at me all night. I didn't have any angst. Maybe I should have. And God knows they were capable of doing some god-awful things, but I don't believe that Americans are all altar boys either. War doesn't bring out the best in people. And I think Americans, Vietnamese, North Vietnamese, Viet Cong, do horrible things during wars. And I imagine there's plenty of blame to go around.
So it sounds like they were people. You still saw them as people and as human beings, even though they were on the other side.
I did, and I don't mean to aggrandize myself. I think, again, I had the luxury of being a nurse. Now, probably if this guy was trying to fire a shot at me, I might have felt a lot different. I did take my scissors out of my pocket, and I used to carry a Kelly clamp, just clamped to my uniform, and anything that he could possibly get where he could hurt me with, I left at the desk. But I didn't have any axe to grind with them.
Did you treat them often, or was it more U.S. troops, or was it a mix?
Oh, it was mostly U.S. troops. We did have a Vietnamese ward that I didn't work on, but there were a lot of women and children. And in the mix, I'm sure we took care of some Viet Cong. We didn't know who they were. And then there was, I do remember an atmosphere of going back and forth. Apparently people were expressing some resentment about having to take care of Vietnamese to our commander. And then the command response would be, well, if we have a mix of Vietnamese, some of them are going to be Viet Cong, it reduces the likelihood that they're going to open the door and throw in a satchel charge to one of the Quonset huts. I don't know if that was true or not. But if I did take care of any Viet Cong, I didn't know who they were. This fellow I do know was an NVA regular.
Did your training, I mean, how well did your training translate when you got in the field? I mean, was it the kind of the thing where there were certain things that you couldn't train for, you just had to experience?
Right, right. Now, obviously I went to nursing school in the civilian setting, specifically St. John's Mercy Hospital School of Nursing, where we were all mainly a lot of little nice Catholic girls. And when I got to Vietnam, you end up doing a lot of things that you would not do in civilian life. For example, when the casualties came in, once we got them triaged, some of them would just need to, sutured. We did that. The nurses did that. We would remove fragments from people. We did a lot of surgical kinds of things that we would not do in the United States, certainly not in the civilian United States. And I think that's a factor of two things. One, it had to be done, and two, there was no the issue of remuneration. Financial compensation was gone. So the docs weren't at all threatened by the nurses doing what typically doctors do, because they weren't getting paid to do anything extra anyway. And that has been a little bit of coming back to civilian life, not so much the stateside military, but civilian life. Having done so much of what I did in Vietnam, the hierarchy in civilian medicine is a little offensive. That you have to have a prescription for everything, and only doctors can do certain things, and nurses can't do that. That had actually, as a practical matter, that's changed a lot with advanced practice nursing. But that was a little bit of a culture shock.
Were there times, I mean, I guess when, in the ICU, were there times when you were just overwhelmed? Some days are worse than others in the terms of the, number of wounded coming in. Can you kind of tell me about that?
We had a pretty good evacuation process. Specifically, when they'd be moved out of the hospital, and the ones that couldn't return to duty, the ones who could return to duty would typically be sent to a convalescent center, and the ones who couldn't would be air evac to Japan.
Do you need to answer that?
No, that's not mine. Is it?
That's yours.
Oh, I'm sorry. I should.
Okay, I'm rolling again.
Yeah, I guess what, never having experienced that kind of thing, you tend to wonder, just I've wondered, is it, when you imagine what the scenario could be like, is it just, a few people coming in, or were there times when, you were overwhelmed with just, say there was a battle or, out in the field and there were just a bunch of wounded soldiers coming in and it was difficult to handle all of them at once? Was there anything like that you experienced?
After I moved to the casualty receiving area, yeah, we would sometimes get large numbers of casualties. They don't come in metered doses. They come in on an as-needed basis, and we were pretty efficient. Frankly, I can't. I remember being very, very, very busy and having people stacked up in pre-op, which is where they would go after we got them triaged in the casualty receiving, which is a great big open bay with stands where the litters would go on. And pre-op, getting them ready to go into surgery. I remember being pretty backed up. I won't say overwhelmed, but backed up in the pre-op area. And my experience was we handled them pretty efficiently. Getting them in, getting them typed and crossed for blood, getting IV access. We would always hang, at the start of every shift, we would take down whatever IV fluids we had hanging, because we always had them ready to go. The IV bottles spiked, the tubing primed, and ready to be put into somebody. And at the beginning of the shift, we'd throw those out if we hadn't used them, put new ones up, put the date and the time. And we were ready to go when they got in there. The casualties. I personally didn't have the experience of having so many casualties like that. We just couldn't take care of them.
Was there ever any particular person that you or your team did something that, quite possibly saved that person's life right then?
I do remember, I don't know if I saved his life, but I do remember one fellow that they were having trouble getting IV access on. And he was African American, not that that makes a difference, but I do remember him. And I was very good at starting IVs. I remember I got an IV started in his, because the issue was if we spent enough time with him, do we need to go on to somebody else? I got an IV in this left antecubital space here. I don't know if that saved his life, but certainly helped. Because one of the doctors who was there, he couldn't find a vein. So, and I don't know whatever happened to that fellow, but I do remember that.
Do you ever sit back like the night after that and reflect on something like that, or is that kind of that there's so much going on you just kind of tend to leave it behind?
Yeah, frankly, I was really, really, really proud of my clinical skills. I look back on that and I remember it, but that was nothing unusual for me. I don't mean to sound like I'm full of myself, but I clinically I knew what I was doing. I didn't have half the degrees that I have now, but clinically I knew what I was doing.
Was there any better, I guess being over there maybe possibly could be just some of the most excellent training you could get as far as coming back here to practice?
Oh, yeah.
Can you kind of characterize
Yeah, but
that?
again, there was the practice of nursing back in the 60s and 70s had a pretty low ceiling. It was very hierarchical. Nursing has expanded and greatly over the years. But if anything, I was overqualified when I came back to stateside nursing. I mean, I could do so many things that I was not allowed to do once I came home. And the other thing is there wasn't the venue, if you will, for that, mass casualties, large numbers of trauma patients, because I didn't choose to work in an ER. And even if I did, knock on wood, we wouldn't have those kinds of scenarios.
When a regular American civilian like me or anyone else thinks of a hospital, obviously we all have kind of, that thought in our head what it looks like. Everyone's been to a hospital. Most people have been through an ER. I would imagine it was a lot different over there than what we're used to, even say what Americans were used to back in the 60s and 70s. Can you kind of compare them? I mean, were the facilities, was it harder to work in those conditions? I mean, can you kind of describe that for me?
I would say the setup of the hospital was one of utility. In other words, we were ready. We had to have our physical setup to take care of patients. We weren't in competition with any for-profit hospitals. We didn't have to have piped-in music. We were the only show in town. There was nowhere else to go. And it was not fancy, but the quality of care was good. The care was good. And again, in our emergency room, it was an open bay with concrete floors and litter stands. And it was very clear what we were prepared for. In the inpatient setting, again, they were Quonset huts, and they were open bay.
What exactly is a Quonset hut?
A Quonset hut is it's shaped like if this is the floor, this is the foundation. It goes, the roof starts here and goes around and ends here. And I guess there's a purpose for that. Maybe they're easier to assemble. The other thing is like wind can't get up under anything. It's a self-contained unit. Again, where the roof begins on the ground and just goes up and around. And they're open bay. I think our intensive care unit, I think we had about a 20-bed capacity in the ICU. And the other units had a little more because they didn't have the equipment that we had to have in an intensive care unit. And we improvised. Sometimes the power would go off, and if you had somebody on a ventilator, you have to get somebody to pump that ambu bag until such time as you could get the power back on for the ventilator.
And when these huts, I mean, when you say open bay, were there doors to them?
No.
When I think of hut, I think of a pretty primitive structure. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it was pretty primitive. There was a door to come in, but once you got in, it was open until you got to the end of the Quonset hut. And there would be communication, some kind of a hallway between Quonset huts. And they'd be lined up, one after another, with some space in between. And then the hospitals over there looked more alike than not. There'd be a concrete walkway in front of the Quonset huts, and then you just, go in whichever one you were destined for.
And so it was more of a series of these huts than an actual big building like you'd imagine over here, most places.
Right, one story. Yeah, and just a series of them, depending on the size of your hospital.
And so when you walked into, say, one of these huts, I mean, can you just describe, the sights, the smells, the temperature? I mean,
Oh, it
describe-
was hot. My God, it was hot over there. I don't remember any distinct smells. They were clean. You couldn't help but be, or I couldn't help but be taken, like with just the sheer numbers of casualties, one bed after another after another. And their spirits, of the guys who were awake and alert, their spirits were pretty high. I guess if I had to use one word, I would just say sad. To see all these young lives interrupted in one way or another, some worse than others, some not as bad. And of course, they loved their nurses. We were officers, so we had to call us ma'am, but they had great fondness for the nurses over there, and still do.
I can imagine. Did you ever, in the place you were at, or any of the facilities, did you ever, deal with any bombing, like any enemy fire or bombings around the facility that you would have to change your tactics or what you're doing, or go take cover?
Every now and then, especially in Chulai, they'd say that they thought there was a sapper. I don't know. There was a term for some kind of a covert Viet Cong, and they would issue the physicians M16s. I was frankly more afraid of the physicians with a loaded gun than I was of the Viet Cong. I would just go hide somewhere, either in my room or over in the intensive care unit or over in the ER. But no, I think probably the closest I ever came to danger, all to my unawares, was that time at the leper colony when I was taken by the foliage. I was out where I shouldn't have been.
Excuse me. Elaborate on that. You're not really saying what the danger. I want you to talk to Matt when you do that.
Okay.
I mean, what kind of danger were you in?
Again, that one of the med caps that we went on out to the leper colony, I went along literally for the ride, and those kids were so cute. We'd bring juicy fruit gum, and they were those little. If somebody had leprosy, the whole family had to move to the colony, even though it's really not all that contagious. And one of the young GMOs, general medical officers, a young doc, we got preoccupied with the terrain, and we were walking along, and the foliage was beautiful. It was jungle, hot, humid. Everything grew there. Well, I don't know how far we had gone when it was an SFC, Sergeant First Class, found us, and the look on his face, he was one of these, God love him, I think he was born with a suntan and a camel in his mouth, that vintage of NCO, and he looked like he'd seen a ghost. He found us and he said, "Oh, ma'am and sir, don't you ever do this to me again. You don't know they're all over here. Ma'am and sir, don't ever do this to me again." So we didn't have the sense God gave a goose to be afraid, but the NCO knew that we could have been killed, captured, and like two complete dunces, we're out admiring the foliage. So we were in a lot of danger. We just didn't have the sense to realize it.
Was that kind of early on in your time over there?
Yeah, that would have been when I was in Chulai. And see, we were operating under the false notion that we were kind of insulated, being on the leper colony, that there was so much phobia about the prospects of getting leprosy that nobody, even the Viet Cong, would come there. And apparently that was not the case. We were not as insulated, we were not anywhere near as safe as we thought we were.
So did you, after that experience, did you think, wow, that could have been the last day of my life? Did that ever cross
Yeah, I did. Like, okay, I need to be a little more careful and think things out and maybe forego the admiration of the foliage when I'm in a war zone.
Did you ever have that feeling again that maybe, that thought crossed your mind, I'm not going to get out of this, I'm not going to come home, or?
No, I don't know. I don't know if, maybe I was in denial. I just went about and did my work, and I made a lot of good friends over there, and I can't say that it was a catastrophic event for me. I learned a lot. I learned a lot clinically. I learned a lot about people. And again, I go back to that classless society. You try to put people in little boxes based on variables that don't mean anything. They're just that, they're variables that don't mean anything. You see people that have very little education, very little advantage in life. You get in a certain set of circumstances and they are really, really stand-up people. Frankly, I think the people who had the hardest time adjusting once they got there were the docs, because they were used to being the kings of everything they did. And they got there and they saw they're just like everybody else. You know, when it's 120 degrees, they sweat just like the rest of us. And that was also an interesting thing to watch, kind of the socialization process that people would go through. How they would, it took most people a couple of weeks to kind of figure out, here I am in this completely, not just a foreign country, a foreign culture, a war zone, the army, to kind of equilibrate. Some people would be very quiet and kind of keep to themselves. And then you'd see within a week, maybe 2 weeks, they kind of come out of their shell. I guess they were going through some kind of a stabilization process of trying to get their bearings. How do I cope with this? Who are these people? Who are the people I want to kind of hang out with? But eventually, it seemed like everybody did come around. Again, if there were one group of people, I think it was the physicians who had a little trouble getting used to such a fundamental existence.
So after you got there and you were in the first location, I forget the name.
July.
Is that where the hurricane hit?
Yeah, Typhoon Hester.
Describe that, going through that.
Well, I had work nights, and I came back to they call it my hooch. I was, by that time, I had bought a room from Ricky Strader, I think. Her parents sent her an air conditioner. And so I had moved into her room. She went back to the States. I had work nights, came back to my room, heated a can of Sterno chili, and opened a can of beer. So I had the chili and the beer, went to bed, and I woke up. I could feel water coming down on me. I woke up and I looked up and I could see the sky, and my roof was gone. And so I got up and put my poncho liner up over my head to try to go back to sleep. And I thought, well, this isn't working. So I opened my door, and as I did, I could see like pieces of building flying through the air. I mean, it blew the roof off of everything. It leveled a lot of buildings. The hooch that I was in originally, that I had brought the picture of, that got blown into the South China Sea. One of the docks was living on the other side of it. He just barely made it out before it toppled into the ocean. Our chapel was blown away. One part of a wall was left standing and said, "Holy, holy, holy." The rest of it was gone. I don't know. I mean, I maybe I'm stress hardy or something. But when I found out my roof was gone, I just was trying to figure out a functional way to go back to sleep because I knew I had to work that night. And of course, then that night, of course, we couldn't stay. We were all huddled in the hospital. What little bit of it still had any cover. And we just had beds lined up next to one another. I was between two patients, and I had a purple Mickey Mouse shirt on. I remember that. It was bright purple, and with a big Mickey Mouse on it. And I remember one patient, I don't know if he was sedated or, I was there just sleeping. I wasn't on duty. And I sometimes I laugh to myself because I remember he would open his eyes and look at me and then fall back to sleep. And I can't help but believe that when at some point he was trying to tell somebody, I swear, so they used to call us round eyes, Caucasians or Americans, as opposed to Oriental. I swear I saw a round eye with long brown hair and a big purple Mickey Mouse shirt. They're saying, yeah, right. And what were you on? But it's amazing, you know, when you you just have to rise to the occasion. You know, the typhoon came, it blew the roof off, so now how am I going to get some sleep so I can go back to work?
And how difficult was it to, I mean, you have patients there and you know, who are struggling to survive or recover, I mean, and then this destroys some of the buildings. How did that injure or harm any of the patients? And how
No, oddly enough, it didn't. I guess we were just lucky. And of course, they immediately put evacuation measures in to get the patients transferred out of where we were as quickly as possible. And then we've been getting the personnel out. That was the last detail to be taken care of. We had, like for suction equipment, for example, we didn't have power, but we had suction equipment as an illustration. You could operate with your foot. You just pumped it up and down and it created a suction. You didn't need electricity for it. For people who were on ventilators, we would take the ambu bags, those big black bags, and just bag them until such time as we could, find a generator. Oddly enough, I don't think we had any casualties of Typhoon Hester. It did level the structures, but the patients were okay, and so were we.
Obviously, when, you know, with a war, there's always political thoughts on one side or the other side, or maybe even a different side, all sides. I mean, did that ever come into play when you, obviously it was going on over here and the protesting, all that. Did you ever get a sense of that from anyone serving over there, like, who had opinions that we shouldn't be here, or was it the kind of thing where we're here, let's just do our job?
I think it was we're here to just do our job. Although one of the favorite songs was we got to get out of this place. I don't know who did, but they were playing that over the weekend when I was up in D.C. for the anniversary of the wall. There were a lot of people didn't want to be there, but you really have to get along when you're in a situation like that. You really have to get along with the people you're with because there's nowhere else to go, and that's why people will ask me sometimes, "Well, was it like MASH?" And I'd say, I do say, I have said, and I continue to say, yes, in many ways, with the exception of that that contentious relationship that Frank Burns and Margaret Houlihan had with everybody. People, you get along because that's your world. You know, you can't be sparring with people all day and then get in your car and drive home of an evening. So if people did have strong political feelings, they kept them to themselves. I don't remember any heated discussions. We were all there. We were just trying to make the best of it.
And then after your first location where the typhoon was, you transferred, or how did that go about? Did they give you orders to go somewhere else, or?
Right. Some people went to Long Bin, the 24th Evac Hospital, I think was in Long Bin. I went to Da Nang, to the 95th Evacuation Hospital.
Was that because of the storm, or was that separate?
Right. Our hospital, we couldn't even give it away, literally. The Vietnamese said, no, were not, no thanks, but no thanks. So then they deployed us to hospitals that were still operational. I went to Da Nang, and another evacuation hospital. I went to the pre-op casualty receiving area. And that's where I spent the rest of my tour.
And was that any different, better, worse, or just?
Pretty much the same. There's a lot of uniformity to Army hospitals of necessity because, well, for one thing, it's worldwide. You know, you can't have a lot of variance and people using different paperwork, and it would just beget chaos. So no, when I got there, it was very much like the 91st Evac.
You mentioned, obviously, that there were a lot of happy memories. And what's one of your happiest memories from your time in Vietnam?
Well, I have, I guess, a number of them. One, I had, God rest their souls, they've passed away, a couple of aunts who were very, very, very one of a kind. They sent me, everybody used to look forward to getting care packages. Well, one day at the 95th, one of the corpsmen came back and said, LT, for lieutenant, I've got to get a gurney or a wheelchair. He said, I'll go back to the mailroom. You've got a big box over there. So I opened it up. He went over and got it, and I opened it up, and everybody's always, somebody has a care package. It's for everybody. I opened it up, and there's a great big case of Basis soap and 2 bottles of St. Anne de Beaupré oil. My aunts had sent away to Canada for this holy oil to protect me. And so there were a lot of disappointed people there. They We really didn't. So I gave the soap away. We had a custom that anything you didn't want, whether it was clothes or anything, we put in the what I get for one of a better term, I'll call the ladies' room. It was pretty primitive, and that meant anybody who wants to take it. I held on to the St. Anne de Beaupré oil until I got ready to go, to come home. They called it Diros, day expected to return from overseas. And I said to one of my friends, I didn't want to put the oil in my luggage because I was afraid Murphy's Law, it would break. Excuse me. So I said to Dee Durbin, her husband was a helicopter pilot, and she had had like 3 miscarriages, I think. And they were over there together. And I said, Dee, do you want to take one of these bottles? And she said, well, yeah. She said, maybe it'll help me and Rusty. She said, to really get pregnant and stay pregnant. And we kind of, So about 3 years later, I happened upon her phone number. And some stuff I was going through. I called her up, and I said, Dee, I said, you remember? I said, this is Dottie McDonald. And she said, oh, Dottie, oh, yeah, oh, Dottie. She said, I just got home from the hospital with my 3rd son in like 30 months or something. And she said, I threw that holy oil halfway across Kansas.
You've mentioned also a couple other specific memories. Is there, and some maybe were difficult, is there another perhaps very difficult moment that stands out?
Yeah, there were, I guess, a number of, discrete ones. Of course, I remember that young fellow, Lance Workman, so vividly. And I remember, I don't know who he was, but he was what's called an expected. And he was expected to recover on his own. In other words, there was nothing more we could do for him. He was a gunshot wound to the head. And he was in one of the Quonset huts. And they just had a screen, like the kind of screen you're used to, like in an exam room, for example, where unless you knew what was on the other side of the screen, you wouldn't know. I used to just go over there. He was unconscious, but you don't know, I don't think anybody knows how much people still hear. I would just go over and talk to him, just hold his hand and talk to him, thinking, okay, if you can't hear me, there's nothing lost. If you can hear me, you must be terrified and lonely, frightened. So, I would just tell him where he was and that he's in the hospital and what day it was, just kind of basic reality orientation. And then he eventually passed away, I think about 36 hours or so. And I don't know who he was, but if he could hear me, I hope that was of some consolation.
And
I need to change the tape.
Okay.
Just give me a second. I'm rolling again, just so you guys know.
Okay. You want me to begin at the beginning of that story or go on to something else?
Yeah, that's fine. You can go to the beginning.
Okay, well, it was an ordinary day in the 95th Evac Hospital, and when we weren't taking care of casualties, we did outpatient kinds of things. People would come in like to have sutures removed, and just a busy day. And this young fella came in, and he had an abscess on the back of his earlobe, his right earlobe. And I had planned to incise and drain it and pack it with the iodoform gauze, and then we started taking casualties. Well, of course, he had to go to the end of the line. Well, he found himself a gurney and went to sleep on it. So as the casualties were coming in, as is the case, he got all of his clothes cut off. He was mistaken as a casualty. And we had to do that because, as I've said, the bloodiest person was not necessarily the most seriously wounded. So we took care of all the casualties, and that went on for hours and hours. And then by the time we got around to him, I incised and drained his earlobe, and I packed it with the iodoform gauze. I'd never taken care of an earlobe before. Come to find out, it's hard to wrap an earlobe because there's nothing to anchor it to. So I was a little giddy, I guess, because I'd been working for a number of hours. And my friend Ruth Brown, she and I were both a little punchy, I think. And so I took care of this fella's ear. And then as I wrapped it, I ended up wrapped it this way and that way. I wrapped his entire head with a cling. He looked like he'd had extensive neurosurgery. And we were laughing, and we shouldn't have been. Again, I think we were just exhausted. So we went to send this guy back to his unit, and as was the custom, if he didn't have any clothes, we'd just go over to PAD, Patient Admission and Disposition, and there'd always be extra uniforms over there, even if they weren't. Well, there weren't any because we had been so busy that day, and people who'd had their clothes cut off and didn't need to be admitted had exhausted the supply of uniforms. So the best we could offer this guy is a white sheet, a white paper sheet. So we wrapped him up in a white paper sheet. And you know, military protocol being what it is, he was very proper. We said we had somebody call his unit to come pick him up. So we said, why don't you wait in here? No, ma'am, thank you, ma'am. I'll wait outside, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. And so his head's all wrapped up, and he's wrapped up in a white paper sheet. He goes out and he sits on one of the bunkers waiting for his unit to come pick him up. And as the Jeep drove up to pick him up, he got up off the bunker. Of course, the paper had disintegrated on the back of the white paper sheet, and off he toddles to get in. Well, Ruth and I got a lot of mileage out of that one. But again, I think it was a factor of our fatigue and maybe the little dark humor. I'm sure that guy has not forgotten me. I don't know who he is, but I'm sure he's not forgotten me.
The gentleman you mentioned prior to him, though, I believe the one whose mom somehow found her way
Yes.
out to where he was. I mean, how, you know, you mentioned that was probably a sad time and a difficult time, and I just, even with the mother being there, it's got to be kind of unusual, because I would imagine in most cases that wasn't the case. So how did that?
Right. I'd never seen that before or since. And the amazing thing, the mother was a nurse. The amazing thing, as I understand it, she got there without a passport, just talking to people. Hey, my son's been wounded. I've got to get here. My son's been wounded. I've got to get there. She got all the way to Chulai. And so she had to come on a helicopter to get where we were. And that does put a different, I guess that's probably why I remember him so vividly, and I remember the mom. And even at that stage, I was not a mother yet, but I could feel for what the mom was going through. Lance was on a ventilator. Looking back on it, I think he probably died of septic shock. Septic shock was a reality back then. We just hadn't given it the name. And her courage, I guess the courage it took for her to get there, and the improvisation and the determination, and the courage it must have taken for her to leave, to see her son like that. She stayed about a week, I think. And for her to leave, at least she could see he was getting good care. Again, it wasn't fancy, but the care was good. The nurses and the docs and the corpsmen, God bless the corpsmen. They were wonderful. And I just remember him among many others.
Is it okay if I ask a question over here?
Yeah.
I mean, you sit there, you've obviously saw, and I want you, when you answer it, I want you to talk to him. But, I mean, you obviously sat by the bedside with a lot of guys that had passed away.
Yeah.
I mean, what is it, describe your emotions, or what it's like to sit there knowing that this soldier is probably going to pass away in the next few hours. It wasn't like it was a natural death. A lot of these were young men that should have lived a lot longer.
Yeah.
Explain that to him, please.
Well, as in, I suppose most, if not all wars, it's the young, healthy people who are deployed to fight them. And the tragedy, the sadness, the sense of loss, futility for somebody who was young and healthy enough to be sent off in a combat role, to suddenly just have his life cut out from under him, whether it was lost limbs, gunshot wound to the head, massive blood loss from an injury, to see literally life go out of a person where there was so much life before. I think I drew, I think on my, I would feel bad and feel sad for somebody who was dying. At the same time, I knew I had to be some kind of a resource for that person. I couldn't let myself get lost in my own sadness or depression or I had to be a resource for that person, to talk to him, not knowing whether he could hear me or not. But that's a pretty awesome stage when a person transitions from this life out of it. We don't know if we go to a next life. I certainly don't know for sure one way or another. But that's it's a very, almost, it's somewhere between honorable, humiliating, sobering event to be the last person that another human being has any contact with in life. And it's addedly so when the person is young. That's not supposed to happen. A person that young shouldn't have his life cut out from under him. Sometimes quite literally, like by losing both of his legs.
Was that something that you had to do often? I mean, was it a weekly thing, it seemed like, or can you characterize that?
No, because we had a pretty good survival rate. It would usually be the expecteds that you'd spend time with, talking to. Usually if we got them in the emergency room alive, we had a pretty good success rate of resuscitating them, restoring them, and taking care of them. Sometimes there'd be somebody who had just exsanguinated. They'd bled out. And because they immediately prior to this, they were young and healthy, sometimes you'd restore, get the pulse going again, get them transfused, and they would be physically alive, but had terrible brain injury, anoxic encephalopathy. Their brain died because they didn't have the blood supply going to it to carry the oxygen. That was always, what's the word I'm looking for, poignant? Like, these darling young guys, what's going on here? That it shouldn't be happening. But we did have a good survival rate if they made it to the hospital. And again, like I said, we did have, now and then there would be one that maybe we were a little too optimistic about. Got them back, or got him back, and physically, but had serious brain damage. I took care of a fellow at Martin Army Hospital. I was the head nurse in the surgical ICU and recovery room, and he was a Vietnam casualty. He'd lost, I believe, both legs. He was blind, lost part of an arm. I mean, the poor guy, he was in for stump revision. Turns out he got married after he came home. They had a child, and I remember thinking, this seems pretty bizarre. This just doesn't seem very normal, whatever normal is. And he was very, very needy, understandably. Long and the short of it is, I do remember him because he used to come and go a lot to Martin Army Hospital. He lived in Columbus, Georgia. 10 years ago, maybe, I saw an article in the paper where this doctor from Rutgers had actually been the surgeon who decided to save him, and had been the object of some serious scorn and criticism by some of his colleagues. And I think this guy's name is Kenny or Danny, the Vietnam vet. He said he has reported, the doctor from Rutgers made a point of finally locating him, went to visit him in Columbus, Georgia. And this guy, they have 2 kids. He scuba dives. I don't know how. God bless him. And he said Danny or Kenny, whatever his name is, says he remembers hearing people saying, "What are you doing with this guy? Let him go." And this doctor was so troubled by it, that, or at least, the word now is closure. I guess he wanted to bring closure. Did I make the right decisions? And he was affirmed that, yeah, I did do the right thing. So I'm sure there were some mistakes made on the side of being overly aggressive But then if this fellow's any illustration, it was a good thing that we put in that time and effort in trying to save him.
What year you were over there for about 2-3 years? It sounds like.
No, I was there for a year.
A year.
Yeah.
And what year was that?
71 into 72.
Okay. So how did you go about coming home? I mean, how did you find out that you were going to be headed home?
The orders came to the hospital in Da Nang, and I don't remember if my supervisor, Major Hackman was her name, I think, came down and said, you've got orders, you're going home. And it was kind of a matter of fact. I was going to go home. The day I left, I said, I'm trying to think, I might have known for a couple of weeks that I was going home. Gave away a lot of my belongings. And the day I left, I was at went in pre-op, said goodbye to all my friends, exchanged some addresses. And, there were people coming and going all the time, people coming in as new people rotating out, going back home. And it was kind of anticlimactic, it's kind of like, okay, bye. And I've stayed in touch with some of them. I came in through Fort Lewis, and somebody there, whoever the officer in charge at nights, he took me to the airport, flew home. My mother and dad met me at the airport, and kind of, just another day. Went back home, and then I was waiting. My orders, I had put in a request. Frankly, I liked the Army. I guess because I wasn't drafted, I was there of my own accord, but I liked it. I really liked active duty. Now, that was during a war. People tend to get very purposeful and focused during a war. So I put in for voluntary indefinite. I wanted to stay in the military. Well, apparently my voluntary indefinite application was a casualty of Typhoon Hester. It never got to Washington, and I never thought to check on it. So I had to wait around for about a month when I got home until they could get my paperwork processed. And then I said, I just want to go somewhere big. Well, I was thinking I wanted to go to a big hospital. Well, the nurse who was making out the assignments in D.C. accommodated me. She sent me to Fort Benning. Fort Benning is very big, but I was hoping to get a big hospital. But it all worked out. I was at Martin Army Hospital. I don't know, I guess it's amazing how you can routinize anything. Just going from one day to the other. I'm here, doing what I'm supposed to do, and then, time to go home. Would you like this? Would you like that? You can have this, you can have that. And then on to the next phase.
So it wasn't the kind of feeling where, some people, or some who serve say, the minute they get their orders to go home, it's, it's a relief and one of the happiest moments that they want to get out of there. But for you, it didn't seem like that.
No, I met my sister on R&R. She met me in Hawaii. And I was kind of glad when the week was up. I had friends in, at that time in Da Nang. I was in Da Nang at the time. I was looking forward to getting back and seeing them. I remember in Honolulu, I was thinking how rushed and how crazy everything was, and how plastic, how artificial it was. That's certainly more than Honolulu. I know is high end, and so maybe it is a little fancy, but it's certainly more the norm than the 95th Evac Hospital in Da Nang. But there was something comforting about being around people I knew, my own routine. I just kind of took it in stride. Sometimes I feel like, because I listen to people, and especially some of the nurses with their PTSD, and I believe that, and I don't doubt anybody's credibility about what they say they've experienced. I didn't, and who knows why. I can't say I don't have any nightmares. I have some poignant memories, I guess, and that's all. But that's part of life. That's part of being a nurse. But I don't feel like I was left with any scars. And I feel for the people who have been. But and I don't know what that's a factor of, but.
But But I would think the experience certainly still in some way changed you.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah. I don't think I was ever really particularly tolerant of a lot of artifact in life. If people live on a spectrum of being process people, just kind of going along day in and day out, or task-oriented people, I'm much more task-oriented person. I think that experience made me more so. When you have to get so much done and everything matters, every action counts, if you are a task-oriented person, I think it refines that and hones it. So if anything, I'm maybe more intolerant of nonsense, just stuff going on.
What was when you got home, your first meeting with your family or loved ones? I mean, how did that go? I mean, can you describe that?
Yeah. My dad met me. Back then, you could walk up to airline gates. My dad was there, and my mother it was in the beginning stages of what we later understood to be emphysema. She waited in another part of the airport for me, and she was sitting down. My dad saw me getting off when I walked up to him, and he is a St. Louis policeman, police detective, kind of a, not a rough guy, but with all that a city policeman would be. But I could tell he kind of choked back some tears. And he was happy to see me, and then I remember my mom gave me some kind of a chain with a medal of the Sacred Heart on it. And then we went home and, just kind of didn't have a whole lot of commotion of any kind.
Did you ever see any protesters when you came back home? I imagine. What did you think of that or of the protesters or the protest movement against the war once you were back?
I had a little problem with the draft dodgers back then. The people going to Canada. When I say I had a little problem, I think I interpreted that as cowardly behavior. I've mellowed with the years, and having had 4 kids, one of whom served in Iraq, maybe I'm a little more forgiving of them now. But I had, I guess, the advantage. When I came back, I stayed in the Army for a while, so I was in kind of an insulated world. We didn't have any protesters on the post. Most of the people I was at Martin Army Hospital with had been in Vietnam, so we were kind of like a little fraternity of our own. I know I've heard of people, they say somebody spat on them, or I didn't have that kind of experience. But then I landed at a military post in my uniform, and I flew out of the Seattle-Tacoma civilian airport. I didn't have any problem there either. And again, spending time or staying in the Army after Vietnam, it was not a whole lot unlike Vietnam. We were just kind of a little close group of people.
A lot of people might think this next question would seem odd, but in talking with you and listening with your experiences, I mean, do you ever miss being over there? It might.
I do. I'll tell you something I really miss is the camaraderie. People would just go to any ends for one another. I miss that. I miss the simplicity. As stark as life was over there, there was something about the simplicity. There was nothing to do except work and hang out. And getting to know people that I probably would never have gotten to know from different walks of life, different sides of the track. I do miss that. Again, the camaraderie, the humor, the closeness, if that's not the same as a camaraderie, and the genuineness of people when they're in a set of circumstances where there's nothing to be gained from trying to impress somebody. You can't impress anybody. Nobody. My car is fancier than your car. That currency just didn't exist there. And I probably won't experience that again.
Is there anything else?
She pretty much.
Is there anything else you'd like to add or touch on, or that we didn't ask about, or anything that you'd like to relay?
I do have one question. What did you learn from that? And I want you to direct it towards him. I mean, this was a year of your life. What can you look back and go, you know what? I learned this one thing, this one sentence.
I think probably the most lasting lesson that I learned is how basically alike we are human beings, and that the variables we use to identify ourselves, our level of education, the neighborhood we live in, this kind of car, how much jewelry we have, how divisive they are. And when you get into a culture, you get into a setting where people are, all they bring to the forefront, all that any one individual brings to the setting is what he or she is as a human being. How basically and almost kind of frightfully we are all alike as opposed to different. And the elements, the variables, if you will, that we use to distinguish ourselves, how different I am from somebody else and so on and so forth, how really unnecessary and divisive they are. When you get people without all the trimmings, they're really pretty good.
It's an interesting thought to bring back from the war.
Well, yeah.
Well, unless there's something else you'd like to add, or then that should be about it. And you don't have to. It's
Yeah.
just if you'd like to.
I think I would add one thing, being where I am now in life. 61 years old, 4 kids, and here we are in yet another war. I would like for us to have the courage to at least tiptoe into exploring. How about peace? We're making the same mistakes over and over and over again. We're all human beings squaring off against one another about one thing or another, typically God, or commonly God. Can we start thinking about peace? And I'm not a peacenik, but I said when I was up in D.C. over the weekend at the anniversary of the wall, we look back now and we realize the terrible mistakes we made about Vietnam. 2020 hindsight, we now know that the domino theory we didn't know that then, that the domino theory didn't hold water. But those guys who were killed and maimed over there are still killed and maimed. You can't undo the damage. So I'd like to start looking at peace as an option.
Okay.
It's wonderful.